We've seen a handful of outsiders seeking to challenge President Biden and former President Donald Trump as third-party or independent candidates. One is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Robert Kennedy Jr.
Oh, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Robert F. Kennedy.
Robert F.
Robert F.
Robert F.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
A Libertarian candidate, Javier Milei, has become the new president of Argentina.
The chainsaw plan of Javier Milei's libertarian government is underway. No gradualism or waiting periods. The changes are already underway.
They say that they like free markets, but they despise free markets. There is no stronger advocate for free market capitalism than myself.
For 30 years, I said the same thing, is the best thing that we could do is have true free market capitalism.
Look at my speeches from 40 years ago, and you see people asking me what's the most important thing we can do for the environment. I've said consistently for all this time, free market capitalism. Because we don't have that in our country. We have corporate crony capitalism. We have this system of cushy, lavish socialism for the rich and a merciless, barbaric capitalism for the poor. There's all different brands of libertarianism. The one thing they all have in common is that they hate authority. And I love dealing with libertarians.
Having Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as our candidate would absolutely seal ballot access for us.
Let's go take back our country.
RFK Jr. hates the naive warmongering neocons. I'd love to see him represent the Libertarian Party I helped build.
I think Robert Kennedy Jr. would make a great Libertarian Party presidential candidate.
I too think Robert Kennedy Jr. would make a great Libertarian Party presidential candidate.
Hello, I am Theodor Herzl, the founder of Political Zionism. I fully endorse Robert Kennedy Jr. as the Libertarian Party's presidential nominee. His genuine concern for the Jewish people and numerous Jewish friends make him an ideal candidate to help bring peace to the region. I am deeply sorry about the neocons.
The case for an RFK Jr. 2024 Libertarian Party presidential nomination. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s interest in running for president as the Libertarian Party's 2024 candidate is a great opportunity to help educate the public about everything that is desperately needed to save not just the US, but perhaps all of civilization if the naive neocons are not stopped in time to prevent what will surely be the final world war. Let me describe the countless benefits of an RFK Jr. LP run. 1. There is the man himself. From every indication that I have, RFK Jr. is a truly courageous man willing to make the ultimate sacrifices to help save America. He seems like the person who, although in an obviously high position of power and prestige, is extremely humble and willing to take advice from, and praise and value, everyone. This podcast episode with fellow Austro-libertarian Jeremy Hammond, who like the great Murray Rothbard, is a profound writer in economics, history and thus criticizing Zionist fallacies, and also vaccinations myths, is a great example of RFK Jr.'s humble and inquisitive demeanor. During the last year, in his podcast RFK Jr. has had leading freedom fighters like David Stockman, Matt Taibbi, Jeffrey Sachs, Scott Ritter, Colonel Douglas McGregor and countless others. 2. Hardly anyone of significant fame has fought the priesthood of scientism and the communism like RFK Jr. has. His best-selling book The Real Anthony Fauci has been akin to Martin Luther's 95 Theses regarding the devastating blow it has given the priesthood of scientism, just like Luther's writings did to the coercive monopoly power of the Catholic Church at the time. The Pope of Scientism, Anthony Fauci, and his chemical slaughter of millions via the pseudoscientific HIV/AIDS death dogma, and its repeat via the COVID mania, and disastrous COVID vaccines talismans, is being exposed for its true mythical nature. The longer this book continues to dominate, and thus outcompete the priesthood of scientism, the more the faithful masses wake up to the fact that they have been sacrificing virgins in vain, and even more importantly, Appreciate freedom in the scientific medical realm. 3. RFK Jr. knows what a calamity the so-called neocons have been. Below is a spectacular 1.5-minute video that summarizes how these simple-minded tribalistic ideologues have bankrupted America and destroyed millions of lives.
The driving force behind wars in this country have been a group of people called the neocons that are embedded in the State Department. They published their manifesto in the late 1990s. It was called the Project for a New American Century, and this outlined their plans for the world. And what they said is that America had won the Cold War, and as the victor, it was our privilege to run the world for at least a century. It would be the Project for a New American Century, and that we should accomplish this feat through the use of our superior military power and through violence. And it outlined 8 countries that needed to be overthrown, including Iraq. And then shortly after publication of that, the neocons in the White House who surrounded President George W. Bush defrauded us into the Iraq War by saying there were weapons of mass destruction and suggesting, falsely that Saddam had something to do with the 9/11 attack. Now, that war cost us in the end about $8 trillion. We left Iraq worse than we found it. We killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. The country is now an incoherent battle between Shia and Sunni death squads. We created ISIS. We drove 2 million refugees into Europe, which destabilized all the nations in Europe for, the next probably century. And all of those neocons were driven out of office, and we thought they were gone forever. But they reappeared first in the Obama administration. Now they run the Biden administration.
4. RFK Jr., although no seasoned Austrian economist like Dr. Ron Paul, is 100% for real capitalism, and understands the vital role of competition in the private sector. Here is a brief but excellent 1-minute video of RFK Jr. properly defending capitalism and free markets.
Analyze our marketplace so that a market does what it's supposed to do, which is to reward good behavior and punish bad behavior. I believe in free market capitalism because I believe that the marketplace promotes efficiency. Efficiency means the elimination of waste. Pollution is waste. A free market would urge us to properly value our natural resources, and it's the undervaluation of those resources that causes us to use them wastefully. In a true free market, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your community. What polluters do is they make themselves rich by making everybody else poor. They raise standards of living for themselves by lowering quality of life for everybody else, and they do that by escaping the discipline of the free market and forcing the public to pay their production costs. You show me a polluter, I'll show you a fat cat using political clout to escape the discipline of the free market and force the public to pay his costs.
Thank you. Let's move on to another.
Here Kennedy properly identifies central banking and the Federal Reserve as the enabler of all the tribalistic warmongering transfers of wealth from the poor and middle class to the mega rich.
The Fed is also, it's what funds the war machine. Fiat currency was invented to fund wars, and a war machine would stop overnight if the Fed wasn't there to fund it. The Fed also, policies are designed to move wealth upward, increase these giant disparities of wealth that completely destabilize our democracy, and to do a lot of everything that comes out of the Fed is pretty bad. All of the ultimate impacts of it. And we have to figure out how to restore sovereignty over the Fed to the public and how to ensure transparency. There's no transparency, and to end the kind of voodoo that these Merlins on Wall Street cook up and pretend that it's actual, economic science, but other than just, a formula for shifting wealth upward. But
RFK Jr. greatly respects Ron Paul, and the feeling is mutual.
He's special to us because he's a friend, and he doesn't call himself a libertarian, but he doesn't know it. He's leaning strongly toward libertarianism and away from the two parties, and that happens to be somebody that questions the lockdowns and the pharmaceuticals and interventionist foreign policy. So he's very much on our side on many issues. That's RFK, Robert Kennedy.
Yeah.
And he's somebody that we visited with. He's been on this program, and he's been to our seminars. So.
Next, I would like to address some potential objections. 1. There are many libertarians, myself included, who feel like Zionism and the resulting Israeli state have been a massive error, and the sort of ideological swimmer's kick that is responsible for most of the geopolitical chaos we see in the world today, especially in the Middle East, given the constant warmongering that arises from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Intellectual leaders associated with the Mises caucus like Scott Horton and Dave Smith have been disappointed, to say the least, regarding RFK Jr.'s seemingly strong support of the Israeli Zionist government and its handling of the Israeli-Hamas war. RFK Jr.'s strong sympathies with Zionism and seemingly good relations with many prominent Zionist Jewish leaders like Rabbi Shmuley is actually a huge benefit for those of us who feel like Zionism was a mistake or needs to be greatly altered. If we are ever going to overcome Zionist fallacies, we must help Zionists realize they made a mistake, just like the great Austrian economists helped socialists overcome their fallacies. RFK Jr. could very well be, or help us foment, the necessary Zionist Gorbachevs needed to end the current brand of Zionism, just like happened with Soviet communism. In RFK Jr.'s discussion with Dave Smith, he did a great job of understanding and describing the Zionist view, and this is great. It took immense class and honest search for truth for RFK Jr. to do the podcast with Dave Smith, who rightly criticized him and sees things differently. More evidence of RFK Jr.'s greatness. And not only that, RFK Jr. in a very sincere and heartfelt manner even offered Dave to be his running mate, thus helping launch to immediate worldwide attention one of Zionism's and statism's best critics. What a golden opportunity. How much of a naive neoconish Zionist could RFK Jr. possibly be, if he actually had Dave Smith as running mate? Bottom line, RFK Jr. would be superb for the LP regarding helping fix all the Zionist-related chaos, especially if he has Dave Smith as running mate, which would greatly improve RFK Jr.'s free market views as well as those related to Zionism. Maybe Dave Smith will be the Jewish Gorbachev. Maybe Dave Smith is Kwisatz Haderach. 2. RFK Jr. is not a real libertarian. This is nonsense. Libertarian is a word whose meaning is very subjective. Some feel like libertarian must be the 100% totally privatized anarcho-capitalist view, some feel like it is consistent with various degrees of minarchism. Ultimately, the LP and the libertarianism it represents is shaped by the complex and subjective views of those who show up. If RFK Jr. did become the LP candidate, he would immediately become a worldwide beacon of anti-priesthood of scientism, anti-neocon, and pro-free market wisdom, and would have another 6 months with which to lead a Ron Paul revolution like exponential growth that could topple the ignorance that is destroying civilization. He is already surrounded by great free marketeers, and as LP candidate, surrounded and better immersed in the Ron Paulized, Austrianized, LP, his messaging would get even better. Anyone who follows the RFK Jr. campaign can see that he is surrounded by great libertarians like the Jackman brothers. Instead of the relatively clueless Democrats somehow corrupting our free market views and party, we will spread our views and help educate his massive following. RFK Jr.'s followers are not static things that can't change or learn. Libertarians love to complain about identity politics, yet they suffer from the same naive thinking. No one is born understanding freedom, some are naive enough to think they are, but most libertarians were once economically ignorant leftists, or die for Zionism Christian Republican rightist kinds. We are constantly evolving our personalities and views, and given that we are all just fellow Homo sapiens, it should be easy to realize that all can quickly learn and change our minds. Mises again.
Liberalism is rationalistic. It maintains that it is possible to convince the immense majority that peaceful cooperation within the framework of society better serves their rightly understood interests than mutual battling and social disintegration. It has full confidence in man's reason. It may be that this optimism is unfounded and that the liberals have erred. But then there is no hope left for mankind's future.
I'm pretty sure Mises rightly didn't care much about attracting an influx of those with little or no regard for the non-aggression principle. I'm sure he believed he could persuade anyone. Javier Milei just managed to persuade the usually socialist-minded clueless Argentinians to accept more freedom, and I have little doubt that RFK Jr., if given 6 months at the national stage, will be able to do likewise. In many ways RFK Jr. could be better than Milei. Milei appears to have eaten COVID mania hook, line, and sinker, and seems to have zero clue regarding the disastrous Zionized neocons. Whatever edge Milei may have on RFK Jr. regarding Austrian economics, a couple of long talks with Dave Smith, or many other Austrianized LP personalities should quickly close the gap. RFK Jr., with some clever marketing, reaching out to influencers and famous people who can be educated, persuaded, who can then lead their millions of followers, is likely the ideal strategy, and RFK Jr. is ideal for this. He already has leading support among young people and I believe is already the overwhelming favorite of the increasingly influential online independent media, and people like Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, Elon, and what remains of real American independent thought. Again, an LP nomination win will then give him an additional 6 months of further exponential growth, which is what Ron Paul lacked when he lost his primaries in 2008-12. In a certain poetic sense, RFK Jr. is what remains of the best of America. The cultural inheritance of the courageous and much beloved Kennedy brand, his network of courageous doctors, lawyers and friends, his proven track record of fighting against the grain, the pissed-off mothers who have had their children and loved ones mutilated by the priesthood of scientism, and countless other accolades make him and his campaign a formidable beacon of freedom with which to hopefully lead America, and the rest of the world from its current path towards increasing tribalism, chaos, and tyranny.